How's it everyone, Grant here. Welcome back to another camera comparison video. This time I've got the LG V50 ThinQ 5G up against the LG V60 ThinQ 5G. Now for all you dozens of V50 owners out there, you're probably thinking, I've got some great cameras in this V50. Do I really need to upgrade to the V60? Or maybe you've got an older LG model like a G6, G7, G8, maybe even a V30 or a V40, and you're thinking about upgrading to the latest and greatest V60. Hopefully this video helps you out. This comparison will be done in some good lighting conditions, so if you're looking for some low light comparisons, stay tuned. I'll be doing a separate video on that. Also, all photos and videos shot here were in full auto mode, and I know the V series of phones from LG are really meant to shine in manual mode, but there are videos out there from much more capable and knowledgeable people than me in the manual operation of these cameras, and I highly encourage you to go check those videos out. So sit back, take a look at all the photos and videos for yourself. Think about which ones you prefer and come back at the end of the video. We'll have a discussion. I'll let you know how I think each of these phones performed. So let's go. Okay, and here's a quick test of the super steady mode on both the V50 and V60. So as I walk, this should look really stable. This is going to be limited to 1080p 30 frames per second if you do use super steady mode. But I'm just holding these out in front of me, and they should be doing really well. I can pick up the pace and start running here. So the camera should have been bobbing up and down, but that gives you an idea of how stable this super steady mode can get them from a walking to a running pace. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how this mode performs on each of these phones. Hey everyone, so here are some camera samples in the park on the LG V50 as well as the LG V60. And this is the ultra wide angle camera here. This is being shot at 1080p 30 frames per second. And I really like shooting in the park because it shows off these blue skies as well as a lot of the greenery. So that should give you a very good idea of how these phones replicate colors pretty well. So let's go ahead and switch camera angles here, and we'll switch up to the main wide angle lens on both. And I'll pan over here to the right and we'll get a zoom test on that cell tower there. So that's 2 times on the V50 and 2 times zoom here on the LG V60. And I noticed the V60 takes a little bit more time to focus up on any kind of zoom or change, so just something to note there. But we can zoom all the way in on the V50, which has a 10 times digital zoom here. So that's what that looks like. Pretty stable, at least in the viewfinder, and pretty clear. And so let's zoom in all the way 10 times on the V60 as well. And as you can see, it takes a little bit of time to focus up, but in the viewfinder also fairly stable and fairly clear. So we'll back it all the way out on both phones and do a little bit of an autofocus test here on the post. So first with the V50, quick autofocus there, and away and back onto the post. One more time. So pretty quick autofocus there by the V50. Let's go ahead and check the V60. And so V60 on the post and focused up, away, back on the post. And so the V60 does seem to take a little bit more time to autofocus on and off. So focusing and refocusing takes a little bit more time, but let's see, still, there we go, we got it on the V60. So, but still a very nice blur, background blur there, nice natural bokeh on the V60, as well as on the V50. I think the V60 has more of that nice background blur, but it takes a little bit more time to focus. And so if we test the stabilization here by walking down the stairs, both these phones should be doing pretty well at 1080p 30 frames per second. But you let me know what you think about the stabilization here. And we'll pull up here and do one last pan around the park, see how it does into some changing light and up into the sun, and how it handles exposure. All right, so we're back in the park in the same scene, this time at 1080p 60 frames per second on each phone. And the V50 cannot change lenses while recording in 60 frames per second, so I can't switch between this main wide angle to an ultra wide or telephoto. But the V60 can do that, so that's the 2 times telephoto, and that is the ultra wide angle mode there on the V60. So I can switch between the cameras here on the V60 while recording in 60 frames per second, but I can't do that on the V50. So just something to note there. And so we'll go ahead and pan over to the right. You can see some of these leaves blowing, so a little bit of movement here for the 60 frames per second effect. And let's go and test the zoom here. So let's see if we can get to about 2 times zoom on the V50. And that's going to be about 2 times zoom there on the V60. And we'll zoom in all the way on the V50. So 8 times digital zoom at 60 frames. And that looks a lot more autofocus, not a lot more grainy than it did at 30 frames, at least in the viewfinder. You let me know what you're seeing here now that it's uploaded onto the channel. But we'll go ahead and do the same here on the V60. This actually has 10 times digital zoom, even at 60 frames per second, and it still looks clear, again, at least in the viewfinder. So let's go ahead and back both of these out and test autofocus at 60 frames per second, so V50 on the post. Like before, focuses up pretty quickly here. One last time. So really quick focus and refocus on the V50 still. V60, just focused up, refocus pretty quickly, so seems to be doing a little bit better this time, but does take a little bit longer than the V50. And let's go ahead and test stabilization, which is a lot harder at 60 frames per second. So we'll see how it handles walking down the stairs there and just walking around the park. But again, I'll pull up here at the end, pan around the park one more time, and see how it does into some of these changing lights into the trees and back up into the sky. Okay, so here's a 4K 30 frames per second sample here. This is the ultra wide angle lens on both phones. Let's see if we can shift between the lenses here. So there you go, main wide on the V50 and main wide on the V60. And so let's go ahead and pan over to the right. We'll do the usual zoom test. So 2 times telephoto on the V50 and 2 times on the V60. And let's go ahead and zoom all the way in. So that's 10 times on the V50, 10 times digital zoom. That looks to be clearer again. And let's do the same on the V60. Same 10 times digital zoom. A little bit grainy here in 4K, at least in the viewfinder. And we'll back both of these out again. And again, autofocus really quickly here on the post at 4K. So V50 autofocus. Still nice and snappy on focus and refocus. And V60 now. And there we go. Took a little bit of time again. Refocus not so bad. One more time on the post there. There you go. That time was a little bit quicker. So let's go ahead and test stabilization at 4K, 30 frames per second. As we move through the park here. And again, same routine. Let's go ahead and pan around the park and see how it handles some of the light through the trees here. And back up into the sky. All right, we're back with 4K 60 frames per second this time. And so let's go ahead and try to change the camera angles on the V50, which you cannot. And we'll change the lenses here on the V60. There's 2 times telephoto, but we can't do ultra wide at 4K 60 here on the V60, but you can switch between the main lens and the telephoto. So let's go ahead and pan over to the right. And we can try to test some of the zoom here against the tower again. So this is going to be about 2 times on the V50, and that is 2 times on the V60. And if we zoom all the way in, that is 8 times digital on the V50, and this is going to be still 10 times on the V60. Switching back to the main lens, we can test some autofocus here at 4K 60 on the V50 first. So fairly quick focus and refocus. And you can hear those sirens in the background, so let's see how the audio is focusing on my voice versus that background noise. And the 4K 60 autofocus on the V60 here. Looks to be not bad here. Still a little bit slower than the V50, but overall not bad. So stabilization test again. Going down the stairs. 60 frames per second. And we'll get to the end and see how it handles the changing light once again. And back up exposure into the sky. Alright, so here's a quick clip from the front-facing camera on both phones. This is both being shot at 1080p, 30 frames per second. And so obviously this is outdoors, so it should give you a good idea of how it performs out here in some relatively good afternoon light here. And I can pan up and pan around so you can actually see how it handles some of this changing light as more of the sun comes directly onto me. You can see the background is a lot more clear and less blown out. And as we keep turning here, back to where we were. Background's a little bit of blown out just because that's where the light's coming from. But otherwise, at least the viewfinder doesn't look too bad. And I can walk a little bit here, so you can see how the stabilization is handled here at 1080p from the front facing cameras here. So quick test of the V50 and the V60 front facing cameras here. Okay, so now that you've seen all the photos and videos for yourself, let me offer you my opinion on how these cameras performed, and let's have a discussion in the comments below. As for the rear-facing cameras, I'll first say that I was concerned about LG moving the V60 to a 64 megapixel main sensor, since many other phones this year are moving to similar high megapixel sensors with poor results. Typically, these sensors come with narrower apertures, meaning they let in less light and result in less than great photo quality. Phone manufacturers have been trying to compensate this with what's called pixel binning, or merging of several pixels together into one larger pixel. Now in theory this sounds good, you get larger pixels with more light and detail. Unfortunately this has not been widely successful. Looking at the V60 photos on their own, they look pretty good, but comparing them to other cameras like even last year's V50, you can see where things start to fall apart a bit. Perhaps this can be compensated in manual mode where this is really meant to shine, but I'm sure many other people just like to point and shoot. Now the V50's photos surprisingly have more accurate colors and even more detail. There isn't as much of a difference between the V60's AI mode, what they call their scene optimizer mode, and its normal auto mode. However, there is a distinct difference on the V50. For example, its auto mode more accurately captures dark, shadowy areas, and its AI mode is able to lighten those areas up and punch up the colors for a more social media pleasing look. Portrait mode is pretty much a toss-up between both phones. It can be a bit tricky to compose non-human photos to activate the portrait effect, but both have variable apertures, meaning you can actually adjust the amount of background blur, which is a really nice feature. Video quality from the rear cameras look pretty good on both phones, with the V50 producing flatter colors and the V60 with a bit more lively colors, but not too overly saturated. Audio from each phone is also very good, continuing LG's reputation for great audio. The V60 seemed slower to focus and had a bit more jitters and jerky motions while on the move, especially at 1080p. I heard the latest update has addressed this issue, so please let me know if you'd like to see an addendum to this video to verify if that is actually fixed. Now moving on to the front-facing cameras, the V50 has a wider field of view, so if you like taking group selfies, that definitely comes in handy. The V50 also has a cooler color temperature, while the V60 tends to be warmer in tone. This carries over to the video quality as well. The V50 is able to handle the afternoon light much better, while the V60 over-brightens that whole scene. Alright, so those are just my observations and opinions. Let me know what you think and which you prefer in the comments, and let's continue the conversation there. Any other questions or comments, leave them down below, and as always, thanks for watching.